peacock assembled, and a tale told by a bagman. It is pleasant to turn from contemplating the strife and turmoil of political existence to the peaceful repose of private life. Although in reality no great partisan of either side, Mr. Pickwick was sufficiently fired with Mr. Pott's enthusiasm to apply his whole time and attention to the proceedings, of which the last chapter affords a description compiled from his own memoranda. Nor while he was thus occupied was Mr. Winkle idle, his whole time being devoted to pleasant walks and short country excursions with Mrs. Pott, who never failed, when such an opportunity presented itself, to seek some relief from the tedious monotony she so constantly complained of. The two gentlemen being thus completely domesticated in the editor's house, Mr. Tupman and Mr. Snodgrass were in a great measure cast upon their own resources. Taking but little interest in public affairs, they beguiled their time chiefly with such amusements as the Peacock afforded, which were limited to a bagatelle board in the first floor, and a sequestered skittle ground in the backyard. In the science and nicety of both these recreations, which are far more abstruse than ordinary men suppose, they were gradually initiated by Mr. Weller, who possessed a perfect knowledge of such pastimes. Thus, notwithstanding that they were in a great measure deprived of the comfort and advantage of Mr. Pickwick's society, they were still enabled to beguile the time, and to prevent its hanging heavily on their hands. It was in the evening, however, that the Peacock presented attractions which enabled the two friends to resist even the invitations of the gifted, though prosy, Pott. It was in the evening that the commercial room was filled with a social circle, whose characters and manners it was the delight of Mr. Tupman to observe, whose sayings and doings it was the habit of Mr. Snodgrass to note down. Most people know what sort of places commercial rooms usually are. That of the Peacock differed in no material respect from the generality of such apartments. That is to say, it was a large, bare-looking room, the furniture of which had no doubt been better when it was newer, with a spacious table in the center, and a variety of smaller dittos in the corners, an extensive assortment of variously shaped chairs, and an old Turkey carpet, bearing about the same relative proportion to the size of the room as a lady's pocket handkerchief might to the floor of a watchbox. The walls were garnished with one or two large maps, and several weather-beaten rough greatcoats, with complicated capes, dangled from a long row of pegs in one corner. The mantel shelf was ornamented with a wooden inkstand, containing one stump of a pen and half a wafer, a road book and directory, a county history minus the cover, and the mortal remains of a trout in a glass coffin. The atmosphere was redolent of tobacco smoke, the fumes of which had communicated a rather dingy hue to the whole room, and more especially to the dusty red curtains which shaded the windows. On the sideboard a variety of miscellaneous articles were huddled together, the most conspicuous of which were some very cloudy fish sauce cruets, a couple of driving boxes, 2 or 3 whips, and as many traveling shawls, a tray of knives and forks, and the mustard. Here it was that Mr. Tupman and Mr. Snodgrass were seated on the evening after the conclusion of the election, with several other temporary inmates of the house, smoking and drinking. "Well, gents," said a stout, hale personage of about 40, with only one eye, a very bright black eye, which twinkled with a roguish expression of fun and good humor, "our noble selves, gents. I always propose that toast to the company, and drink merry to myself." "Eh, Mary?" "Get along with you, you wretch," said the handmaiden, obviously not ill-pleased with the compliment, however. "Don't go away, Mary," said the black-eyed man. "Let me alone, imperence," said the young lady. "Never mind," said the one-eyed man, calling after the girl as she left the room. "I'll step out by and by, Mary. Keep your spirits up, dear." Here he went through the not very difficult process of winking upon the company with his solitary eye, to the enthusiastic delight of an elderly personage with a dirty face and a clay pipe. "Rum creeters is women," said the dirty-faced man after a pause. "Ah, no mistake about that," said a very red-faced man behind a cigar. After this little bit of philosophy, there was another pause. "There's rummer things than women in this world, though, mind you," said the man with the black eye, slowly filling a large Dutch pipe with a most capacious bowl. "Are you married?" inquired the dirty-faced man. "Can't say I am." "I thought not." Here the dirty-faced man fell into ecstasies of mirth at his own retort, in which he was joined by a man of bland voice and placid countenance, who always made it a point to agree with everybody. "Women, after all, gentlemen," said the enthusiastic Mr. Snodgrass, "are the great props and comforts of our existence." "So they are," said the placid gentleman. "When they're in a good humor," interposed the dirty-faced man. "And that's very true," said the placid one. "I repudiate that qualification," said Mr. Snodgrass, whose thoughts were fast reverting to Emily Wardle. "I repudiate it with disdain, with indignation. Show me the man who says anything against women, as women, and I boldly declare he is not a man." And Mr. Snodgrass took his cigar from his mouth and struck the table violently with his clenched fist. "That's good sound argument," said the placid man. "Containing a position which I deny," interrupted he of the dirty countenance. "And there's certainly a very great deal of truth in what you observe too, sir," said the placid gentleman. "Your health, sir," said the bagman with the lonely eye, bestowing an approving nod on Mr. Snodgrass. Mr. Snodgrass acknowledged the compliment. "I always like to hear a good argument," continued the bagman. "A sharp one like this. It's very improving. But this little argument about women brought to my mind a story I have heard an old uncle of mine tell, the recollection of which, just now, made me say there were rummer things than women to be met with, sometimes." "I should like to hear that same story," said the red-faced man with the cigar. "Should you?" was the only reply of the bagman, who continued to smoke with great vehemence. "So should I," said Mr. Tupman, speaking for the first time. He was always anxious to increase his stock of experience. "Should you? Well then, I'll tell it." "No, I won't." "I know you won't believe it," said the man with the roguish eye, making that organ look more roguish than ever. "If you say it's true, of course I shall," said Mr. Tupman. "Well, upon that understanding I'll tell you," replied the traveler. "Did you ever hear of the great commercial house of Bilson and Slum? But it doesn't matter, though, whether you did or not, because they retired from business long since. It's 80 years ago, since the circumstance happened to a traveler for that house, but he was a particular friend of my Uncle S., and my uncle told the story to me. It's a queer name, but he used to call it the Bagman's Story. And he used to tell it something in this way. One winter's evening, about 5 o'clock, just as it began to grow dusk, a man in a gig might have been seen urging his tired horse along the road which leads across Marlborough Downs in the direction of Bristol. I say he might have been seen, and I have no doubt he would have been, if anybody but a blind man had happened to pass that way. But the weather was so bad, and the night so cold and wet, that nothing was out but the water, and so the traveler jogged along in the middle of the road, lonesome and dreary enough. If any bagman of that day could have caught sight of the little neck-or-nothing sort of gig, with a clay-colored body and red wheels, and the vixenish, ill-tempered, fast-going bay mare that looked like a cross between a butcher's horse and a two-penny post-office pony, he would have known at once that this traveler could have been no other than Tom Smart, of the great house of Bilson and Slum, Catehatton Street, City. However, as there was no bagman to look on, nobody knew anything at all about the matter. And so Tom Smart and his clay-colored gig with the red wheels and the vixenish mare with the fast pace went on together, keeping the secret among them, and nobody was a bit the wiser. There are many pleasanter places even in this dreary world than Marlborough Downs when it blows hard. And if you throw in beside a gloomy winter's evening, a miry and sloppy road, and a pelting fall of heavy rain, and try the effect, by way of experiment, in your own proper person, you will experience the full force of this observation. The wind blew not up the road or down it, though that's bad enough, but sheer across it, sending the rain slanting down like the lines they used to rule in the copybooks at school to make the boys slope well. For a moment it would die away, and the traveler would begin to delude himself into the belief that, exhausted with its previous fury, it had quietly laid itself down to rest, when, whoo! He could hear it growling and whistling in the distance, and on it would come rushing over the hilltops and sweeping along the plain, gathering sound and strength as it drew nearer, until it dashed with a heavy gust against horse and man, driving the sharp rain into their ears, and its cold damp breath into their very bones. And past them it would scour, far, far away, with a stunning roar, as if in ridicule of their weakness and triumphant in the consciousness of its own strength and power. The bay mare splashed away, through the mud and water with drooping ears, now and then tossing her head as if to express her disgust at this very ungentlemanly behavior of the elements, but keeping a good pace notwithstanding, until a gust of wind, more furious than any that had yet assailed them, caused her to stop suddenly and plant her 4 feet firmly against the ground, to prevent her being blown over. It's a special mercy that she did this, for if she had been blown over, the vixenish mare was so light, and the gig was so light, and Tom Smart such a light weight into the bargain, that they must infallibly have all gone rolling over and over together, until they reached the confines of earth, or until the wind fell. And in either case the probability is that neither the vixenish mare, nor the clay-colored gig with the red wheels, nor Tom Smart, would ever have been fit for service again. "Well, damn my straps and whiskers," says Tom Smart. Tom sometimes had an unpleasant knack of swearing. "Damn my straps and whiskers," says Tom, "if this ain't pleasant, blow me." You'll very likely ask me why. As Tom Smart had been pretty well blown already, he expressed this wish to be submitted to the same process again. I can't say. All I know is that Tom Smart said so, or at least he always told my uncle he said so, and it's just the same thing. "Blow me," says Tom Smart, and the mare neighed as if she were precisely of the same opinion. "Cheer up, old girl," said Tom, patting the bay mare on the neck with the end of his whip. "It won't do pushing on, such a night as this. The first house we come to will put up at, so the faster you go the sooner it's over. So ho, old girl, gently, gently." Whether the vixenish mare was sufficiently well acquainted with the tones of Tom's voice to comprehend his meaning, or whether she found it colder standing still than moving on, of course I can't say. But I can say that Tom had no sooner finished speaking than she pricked up her ears and started forward at a speed which made the clay-colored gig rattle until you would have supposed every one of the red spokes were going to fly out on the turf of Marlborough Downs. And even Tom, whip as he was, couldn't stop or check her pace, until she drew up of her own accord, before a roadside inn on the right-hand side of the way, about 1/4 of a mile from the end of the downs. Tom cast a hasty glance at the upper part of the house as he threw the reins to the hostler, and stuck the whip in the box. It was a strange old place, built of a kind of shingle, inlaid, as it were, with cross beams, with gable-topped windows projecting completely over the pathway, and a low door with a dark porch, and a couple of steep steps leading down into the house, instead of the modern fashion of 6 shallow ones leading up to it. It was a comfortable-looking place, though, for there was a strong, cheerful light in the bar window, which shed a bright ray across the road, and even lighted up the hedge on the other side. And there was a red flickering light in the opposite window, one moment but faintly discernible, and the next gleaming strongly through the drawn curtains, which intimated that a rousing fire was blazing within. Marking these little evidences with the eye of an experienced traveler, Tom dismounted with as much agility as his half-frozen limbs would permit, and entered the house. In less than 5 minutes' time, Tom was ensconced in the room opposite the bar, the very room where he had imagined the fire blazing before, a substantial, matter-of-fact, roaring fire, composed of something short of a bushel of coals, and wood enough to make 6 decent gooseberry bushes, piled halfway up the chimney, and roaring and crackling with a sound that of itself would have warmed the heart of any reasonable man. This was comfortable, but this was not all, for a smartly dressed girl, with a bright eye and a neat ankle, was laying a very clean white cloth on the table. And as Tom sat with his slippered feet on the fender, and his back to the open door, he saw a charming prospect of the bar reflected in the glass over the chimney-piece, with delightful rows of green bottles and gold labels, together with jars of pickles and preserves, and cheeses and boiled hams, and rounds of beef, arranged on shelves in the most tempting and delicious array. Well, this was comfortable too. But even this was not all, for in the bar, seated at tea at the nicest possible little table, drawn close up before the brightest possible little fire, was a buxom widow of somewhere about 48 or thereabouts, with a face as comfortable as the bar, who was evidently the landlady of the house, and the supreme ruler over all these agreeable possessions. There was only one drawback to the beauty of the whole picture, and that was a very tall man in a brown coat and bright basket buttons, and black whiskers and wavy black hair, who was seated at tea with the widow, and who it required no great penetration to discover was in a fair way of persuading her to be a widow no longer, but to confer upon him the privilege of sitting down in that bar, for and during the whole remainder of the term of his natural life. Tom Smart was by no means of an irritable or envious disposition, but somehow or other the tall man with the brown coat and the bright basket buttons did rouse what little gall he had in his composition, and did make him feel extremely indignant, the more especially as he could now and then observe, from his seat before the glass, certain little affectionate familiarities passing between the tall man and the widow, which sufficiently denoted that the tall man was as high in favor as he was in size. Tom was fond of hot punch. I may venture to say he was very fond of hot punch, and, after he had seen the vixenish mare well fed and well littered down, and had eaten every bit of the nice little hot dinner which the widow tossed up for him with her own hands, he just ordered a tumbler of it by way of experiment. Now, if there was one thing in the whole range of domestic art which the widow could manufacture better than another, it was this identical article. And the first tumbler was adapted to Tom Smart's taste with such peculiar nicety that he ordered a second with the least possible delay. Hot punch is a pleasant thing, gentlemen, an extremely pleasant thing under any circumstances, but in that snug old parlor, before the roaring fire, with the wind blowing outside till every timber in the old house creaked again, Tom Smart found it perfectly delightful. He ordered another tumbler, and then another. I am not quite certain whether he didn't order another after that, but the more he drank of the hot punch, the more he thought of the tall man. "Confound his impudence," said Tom to himself. "What business has he in that snug bar? Such an ugly villain, too," said Tom. "If the widow had any taste, she might surely pick up some better fellow than that." Here Tom's eye wandered from the glass on the chimney-piece to the glass on the table, and as he felt himself becoming gradually sentimental, he emptied the fourth tumbler of punch and ordered a fifth. Tom Smart, gentlemen, had always been very much attached to the public line. It had been long his ambition to stand in a bar of his own, in a green coat, knee cords, and tops. He had a great notion of taking the chair at convivial dinners, and he had often thought how well he could preside in a room of his own in the talking way, and what a capital example he could set to his customers in the drinking department. All these things passed rapidly through Tom's mind as he sat drinking the hot punch by the roaring fire, and he felt very justly and properly indignant that the tall man should be in a fair way of keeping such an excellent house, while he, Tom Smart, was as far off from it as ever. So, after deliberating over the two last tumblers, whether he hadn't a perfect right to pick a quarrel with the tall man for having contrived to get into the good graces of the buxom widow, Tom Smart at last arrived at the satisfactory conclusion that he was a very ill-used and persecuted individual, and had better go to bed. Up a wide and ancient staircase, the smart girl preceded Tom, shading the chamber candle with her hand, to protect it from the currents of air which, in such a rambling old place, might have found plenty of room to disport themselves in, without blowing the candle out, but which did blow it out nevertheless, thus affording Tom's enemies an opportunity of asserting that it was he, and not the wind, who extinguished the candle, and that while he pretended to be blowing it alight again, he was in fact kissing the girl. Be this as it may, another light was obtained, and Tom was conducted through a maze of rooms and a labyrinth of passages to the apartment which had been prepared for his reception, where the girl bade him good night and left him alone. It was a good large room with big closets, and a bed which might have served for a whole boarding school, to say nothing of a couple of oaken presses that would have held the baggage of a small army. But what struck Tom's fancy most was a strange, grim-looking, high-backed chair, carved in the most fantastic manner, with a flowered damask cushion, and the round knobs at the bottom of the legs carefully tied up in red cloth, as if it had got the gout in its toes. Of any other queer chair, Tom would only have thought it was a queer chair, and there would have been an end of the matter. But there was something about this particular chair, and yet he couldn't tell what it was, so odd and so unlike any other piece of furniture he had ever seen, that it seemed to fascinate him. He sat down before the fire, and stared at the old chair for half an hour. Damn the chair. It was such a strange old thing, he couldn't take his eyes off it. "Well," said Tom, slowly undressing himself, and staring at the old chair all the while, which stood with a mysterious aspect by the bedside. I never saw such a rum concern as that in my days. Very odd, said Tom, who had got rather sage with the hot punch, very odd. Tom shook his head with an air of profound wisdom and looked at the chair again. He couldn't make anything of it, though, so he got into bed, covered himself up warm, and fell asleep. In about half an hour, Tom woke up with a start, from a confused dream of tall men and tumblers of punch, and the first object that presented itself to his waking imagination was the queer chair. I won't look at it any more, said Tom to himself, and he squeezed his eyelids together and tried to persuade himself he was going to sleep again. No use. Nothing but queer chairs danced before his eyes, kicking up their legs, jumping over each other's backs, and playing all kinds of antics. I may as well see one real chair as 2 or 3 complete sets of false ones, said Tom, bringing out his head from under the bedclothes. There it was, plainly discernible by the light of the fire, looking as provoking as ever. Tom gazed at the chair, and, suddenly as he looked at it, a most extraordinary change seemed to come over it. The carving of the back gradually assumed the lineaments and expression of an old, shriveled human face. The damask cushion became an antique, flapped waistcoat. The round knobs grew into a couple of feet, encased in red cloth slippers, and the whole chair looked like a very ugly old man of the previous century, with his arms akimbo. Tom sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes to dispel the illusion. No. The chair was an ugly old gentleman, and what was more, he was winking at Tom Smart. Tom was naturally a headlong, careless sort of dog, and he had had 5 tumblers of hot punch into the bargain. So, although he was a little startled at first, he began to grow rather indignant when he saw the old gentleman winking and leering at him with such an impudent air. At length he resolved that he wouldn't stand it, and as the old face still kept winking away as fast as ever, Tom said, in a very angry tone, "What the devil are you winking at me for?" "Because I like it, Tom Smart," said the chair, or the old gentleman, whichever you like to call him. He stopped winking, though, when Tom spoke, and began grinning like a superannuated monkey. "How do you know my name, Old Nutcracker Face?" inquired Tom Smart, rather staggered, though he pretended to carry it off so well. "Come, come, Tom," said the old gentleman, "that's not the way to address solid Spanish mahogany. Damn, you couldn't treat me with less respect if I was veneered." When the old gentleman said this, he looked so fierce that Tom began to grow frightened. "I didn't mean to treat you with any disrespect, sir," said Tom, in a much humbler tone than he had spoken in at first. "Well, well," said the old fellow, "perhaps not, perhaps not. Tom, sir, I know everything about you, Tom, everything. You're very poor, Tom." "I certainly am," said Tom Smart. "But how came you to know that?" "Never mind that," said the old gentleman. "You're much too fond of punch, Tom." Tom Smart was just on the point of protesting that he hadn't tasted a drop since his last birthday, but when his eye encountered that of the old gentleman, he looked so knowing that Tom blushed and was silent. "Tom," said the old gentleman, "the widow's a fine woman, remarkably fine woman, eh, Tom?" Here the old fellow screwed up his eyes, cocked up one of his wasted little legs, and looked altogether so unpleasantly amorous that Tom was quite disgusted with the levity of his behavior at his time of life, too. "I am her guardian, Tom," said the old gentleman. "Are you?" inquired Tom Smart. "I knew her mother, Tom," said the old fellow, "and her grandmother. She was very fond of me, made me this waistcoat, Tom." "Did she?" said Tom Smart. "And these shoes," said the old fellow, lifting up one of the red cloth mufflers. "But don't mention it, Tom. I shouldn't like to have it known that she was so much attached to me. It might occasion some unpleasantness in the family." When the old rascal said this, he looked so extremely impertinent that, as Tom Smart afterwards declared, he could have sat upon him without remorse. "I have been a great favorite among the women in my time, Tom," said the profligate old debauchee. "Hundreds of fine women have sat in my lap for hours together. What do you think of that, you dog, eh?" The old gentleman was proceeding to recount some other exploits of his youth, when he was seized with such a violent fit of creaking that he was unable to proceed. "Just serves you right, old boy," thought Tom Smart, but he didn't say anything. "Ah," said the old fellow, "I am a good deal troubled with this now. I am getting old, Tom, and have lost nearly all my nails. I have had an operation performed. To a small piece let into my back end, I found it a severe trial, Tom." "I dare say you did, sir," said Tom Smart. "However," said the old gentleman, "that's not the point. Tom, I want you to marry the widow." "Me, sir," said Tom. "You," said the old gentleman. "Bless your reverend locks," said Tom. He had a few scattered horse hairs left. "Bless your reverend locks, she wouldn't have me." And Tom sighed involuntarily as he thought of the bar. "Wouldn't she?" said the old gentleman firmly. "No, no," said Tom. "There's somebody else in the wind. A a confoundedly tall man with black whiskers." "Tom," said the old gentleman, "she will never have him." "Won't she?" said Tom. "If you stood in the bar, old gentleman, you'd tell another story." "Pooh, pooh," said the old gentleman. "I know all about that." "About what?" said Tom. "The kissing behind the door, and all that sort of thing, Tom," said the old gentleman. And here he gave another impudent look, which made Tom very wroth, because as you all know, gentlemen, to hear an old fellow, who ought to know better, talking about these things, is very unpleasant, nothing more so. "I know all about that, Tom," said the old gentleman. "I have seen it done very often in my time, Tom, between more people than I should like to mention to you, but it never came to anything after all." "You must have seen some queer things," said Tom, with an inquisitive look. "You may say that, Tom," replied the old fellow, with a very complicated wink. "I am the last of my family, Tom," said the old gentleman, with a melancholy sigh. "Was it a large one?" inquired Tom Smart. "There were 12 of us, Tom," said the old gentleman. "Fine, straight-backed, handsome fellows as you'd wish to see. None of your modern abortions all with arms, and with a degree of polish, though I say it that should not, which it would have done your heart good to behold." "And what's become of the others, sir?" asked Tom Smart. The old gentleman applied his elbow to his eye as he replied, "Gone, Tom, gone. We had hard service, Tom, and they hadn't all my constitution. They got rheumatic about the legs and arms, and went into kitchens and other hospitals. And one of 'em, with long service and hard usage, positively lost his senses. He got so crazy that he was obliged to be burnt. Shocking thing that, Tom." "Dreadful," said Tom Smart. The old fellow paused for a few minutes, apparently struggling with his feelings of emotion, and then said, "However, Tom, I am wandering from the point. This tall man, Tom, is a rascally adventurer. The moment he married the widow, he would sell off all the furniture and run away. What would be the consequence? She would be deserted and reduced to ruin, and I should catch my death of cold in some broker's shop." "Yes, but—" "Don't interrupt me," said the old gentleman. "Of you, Tom, I entertain a very different opinion, for I well know that if you once settled yourself in a public house, you would never leave it, as long as there was anything to drink within its walls." "I am very much obliged to you for your good opinion, sir," said Tom Smart. "Therefore," resumed the old gentleman in a dictatorial tone, "you shall have her, and he shall not." "What is to prevent it?" said Tom Smart eagerly. "This disclosure," replied the old gentleman. "He is already married." "How can I prove it?" said Tom, starting half out of bed. The old gentleman untucked his arm from his side, and having pointed to one of the oaken presses, immediately replaced it in its old position. "He little thinks," said the old gentleman, "that in the right-hand pocket of a pair of trousers in that press he has left a letter, entreating him to return to his disconsolate wife, with 6 mark me Tom 6 babes, and all of them small ones." As the old gentleman solemnly uttered these words, his features grew less and less distinct, and his figure more shadowy. A film came over Tom Smart's eyes. The old man seemed gradually blending into the chair, the damask waistcoat to resolve into a cushion, the red slippers to shrink into little red cloth bags. The light faded gently away, and Tom Smart fell back on his pillow and dropped asleep. Morning aroused Tom from the lethargic slumber, into which he had fallen on the disappearance of the old man. He sat up in bed, and for some minutes vainly endeavored to recall the events of the preceding night. Suddenly they rushed upon him. He looked at the chair. It was a fantastic and grim-looking piece of furniture, certainly, but it must have been a remarkably ingenious and lively imagination that could have discovered any resemblance between it and an old man. "How are you, old boy?" said Tom. He was bolder in the daylight most men are. The chair remained motionless and spoke not a word. "Miserable morning," said Tom. "No." The chair would not be drawn into conversation. "Which press did you point to? You can tell me that," said Tom. "Devil a word, gentlemen," the chair would say. "It's not much trouble to open it anyhow," said Tom, getting out of bed very deliberately. He walked up to one of the presses. The key was in the lock. He turned it and opened the door. There was a pair of trousers there. He put his hand into the pocket and drew forth the identical letter the old gentleman had described. "Queer sort of thing, this," said Tom Smart, looking first at the chair and then at the press, and then at the letter, and then at the chair again. "Very queer," said Tom. But as there was nothing in either to lessen the queerness, he thought he might as well dress himself and settle the tall man's business at once, just to put him out of his misery. Tom surveyed the rooms he passed through on his way downstairs with the scrutinizing eye of a landlord, thinking it not impossible that before long they and their contents would be his property. The tall man was standing in the snug little bar, with his hands behind him, quite at home. He grinned vacantly at Tom. A casual observer might have supposed he did it, only to show his white teeth. But Tom Smart thought that a consciousness of triumph was passing through the place where the tall man's mind would have been if he had had any. Tom laughed in his face and summoned the landlady. "Good morning, ma'am," said Tom Smart, closing the door of the little parlor as the widow entered. "Good morning, sir," said the widow. "What will you take for breakfast, sir?" Tom was thinking how he should open the case, so he made no answer. "There's a very nice ham," said the widow, "and a beautiful cold larded fowl. Shall I send em in, sir?" These words roused Tom from his reflections. His admiration of the widow increased as she spoke. Thoughtful creature. Comfortable provider. "Who is that gentleman in the bar, ma'am?" inquired Tom. "His name is Dickens, sir," said the widow, slightly blushing. "He's a tall man," said Tom. "He is a very fine man, sir," replied the widow, "and a very nice gentleman." "Ah," said Tom. "Is there anything more you want, sir?" inquired the widow, rather puzzled by Tom's manner. "Why, yes," said Tom. "My dear ma'am, will you have the kindness to sit down for one moment?" The widow looked much amazed, but she sat down, and Tom sat down too, close beside her. "I don't know how it happened. Gentlemen, indeed, my uncle used to tell me that Tom Smart said he didn't know how it happened either, but somehow or other the palm of Tom's hand fell upon the back of the widow's hand and remained there while he spoke. "My dear ma'am," said Tom Smart, he had always a great notion of committing the amiable. "My dear ma'am, you deserve a very excellent husband, you do indeed." "Lor, sir," said the widow as well she might, Tom's mode of commencing the conversation being rather unusual, not to say startling. The fact of his never having set eyes upon her before the previous night being taken into consideration. "Lor, sir, I scorn to flatter, my dear ma'am," said Tom Smart. "You deserve a very admirable husband, and whoever he is, he'll be a very lucky man." As Tom said this, his eye involuntarily wandered from the widow's face to the comfort around him. The widow looked more puzzled than ever, and made an effort to rise. Tom gently pressed her hand, as if to detain her, and she kept her seat. Widows, gentlemen, are not usually timorous, as my uncle used to say. "I am sure I am very much obliged to you, sir, for your good opinion," said the buxom landlady, half laughing, "and if ever I marry again." "If," said Tom Smart, looking very shrewdly out of the right-hand corner of his left eye. "If? Well," said the widow, laughing outright this time, "when I do, I hope I shall have as good a husband as you describe." "Dickens to wit," said Tom. "Lor, sir," exclaimed the widow. "Oh, don't tell me," said Tom, "I know him." "I am sure nobody who knows him knows anything bad of him," said the widow, bridling up at the mysterious air with which Tom had spoken. "Hem," said Tom Smart. The widow began to think it was high time to cry, so she took out her handkerchief and inquired whether Tom wished to insult her, whether he thought it like a gentleman to take away the character of another gentleman behind his back. Why, if he had got anything to say, he didn't say it to the man. Like a man, instead of terrifying a poor weak woman in that way, and so forth. I'll say it to him fast enough, said Tom, only I want you to hear it first. What is it? Inquired the widow, looking intently in Tom's countenance. I'll astonish you, said Tom, putting his hand in his pocket. If it is that he wants money, said the widow, I know that already, and you needn't trouble yourself. Pooh, nonsense, that's nothing, said Tom Smart. I want money. Tain't that? Oh dear, what can it be? Exclaimed the poor widow. Don't be frightened, said Tom Smart. He slowly drew forth the letter and unfolded it. You won't scream, said Tom doubtfully. No, no, replied the widow, let me see it. You won't go fainting away or any of that nonsense, said Tom. No, no, returned the widow hastily. And don't run out and blow him up, said Tom, because I'll do all that for you. You had better not exert yourself. Well, well, said the widow, let me see it. I will, replied Tom Smart, and with these words he placed the letter in the widow's hand. Gentlemen, I have heard my uncle say that Tom Smart said the widow's lamentations, when she heard the disclosure, would have pierced a heart of stone. Tom was certainly very tender-hearted, but they pierced his to the very core. The widow rocked herself to and fro and wrung her hands. Oh, the deception and villainy of the man, said the widow. Frightful, my dear ma'am, but compose yourself, said Tom Smart. Oh, I can't compose myself, shrieked the widow. I shall never find anyone else I can love so much. Oh, yes you will, my dear soul, said Tom Smart, letting fall a shower of the largest-sized tears in pity for the widow's misfortunes. Tom Smart, in the energy of his compassion, had put his arm round the widow's waist, and the widow, in a passion of grief, had clasped Tom's hand. She looked up in Tom's face and smiled through her tears. Tom looked down in hers and smiled through his. I never could find out, gentlemen, whether Tom did or did not kiss the widow at that particular moment. He used to tell my uncle he didn't, but I have my doubts about it. Between ourselves, gentlemen, I rather think he did. At all events, Tom kicked the very tall man out at the front door half an hour later and married the widow a month after. And he used to drive about the country with the clay-colored gig with the red wheels and the vixenish mare with the fast pace till he gave up business many years afterwards and went to France with his wife, and then the old house was pulled down. Will you allow me to ask you, said the inquisitive old gentleman, what became of the chair? Why, replied the one-eyed bagman, it was observed to creak very much on the day of the wedding, but Tom Smart couldn't say for certain whether it was with pleasure or bodily infirmity. He rather thought it was the latter, though, for it never spoke afterwards. Everybody believed the story, didn't they? Said the dirty-faced man, refilling his pipe. Except Tom's enemies, replied the bagman. Some of 'em said Tom invented it altogether, and others said he was drunk and fancied it, and got hold of the wrong trousers by mistake before he went to bed. But nobody ever minded what they said. Tom Smart said it was all true. Every word. And your uncle. Every letter. They must have been very nice men, both of 'em, said the dirty-faced man. Yes, they were, replied the bagman, very nice men indeed. Chapter 15, in which is given a faithful portraiture of two distinguished persons, and an accurate description of a public breakfast in their house and grounds, which public breakfast leads to the recognition of an old acquaintance and the commencement of another chapter. Mr. Pickwick's conscience had been somewhat reproaching him for his recent neglect of his friends at the Peacock, and he was just on the point of walking forth in quest of them, on the third morning after the election had terminated, when his faithful valet put into his hand a card, on which was engraved the following inscription: Mrs. Leo Hunter the Den, EATNSWLL. Person's a-waitin', said Sam epigrammatically. Does the person want me, Sam? Inquired Mr. Pickwick. He wants you particular, and no one else LL do, as the devil's private secretary said ven he fetched Ave Dr. Faustus, replied Mr. Weller. Hey, is it a gentleman? Said Mr. Pickwick. A worry good imitation o' one, if it ain't, replied Mr. Weller. But this is a lady's card, said Mr. Pickwick. Given me by a gentleman, howsoever, replied Sam, "and he's a-waitin' in the drawing-room said he'd rather wait all day than not see you." Mr. Pickwick, on hearing this determination, descended to the drawing-room, where sat a grave man who started up on his entrance and said, with an air of profound respect, "Mr. Pickwick, I presume." "The same." "Allow me, sir, the honor of grasping your hand." "Permit me, sir, to shake it," said the grave man. "Certainly," said Mr. Pickwick. The stranger shook the extended hand, and then continued, "We have heard of your fame, sir. The noise of your antiquarian discussion has reached the ears of Mrs. Leo Hunter, my wife, sir. I am Mr. Leo Hunter." The stranger paused, as if he expected that Mr. Pickwick would be overcome by the disclosure. But seeing that he remained perfectly calm, proceeded. "My wife, sir, Mrs. Leo Hunter, is proud to number among her acquaintance all those who have rendered themselves celebrated by their works and talents. Permit me, sir, to place in a conspicuous part of the list the name of Mr. Pickwick, and his brother members of the club that derives its name from him." "I shall be extremely happy to make the acquaintance of such a lady, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick. "You shall make it, sir," said the grave man. "Tomorrow morning, sir, we give a public breakfast à fête champetre to a great number of those who have rendered themselves celebrated by their works and talents. Permit Mrs. Leo Hunter, sir, to have the gratification of seeing you at the den." "With great pleasure," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Mrs. Leo Hunter has many of these breakfasts, sir," resumed the new acquaintance, "feasts of reason, sir, and flows of soul, as somebody who wrote a sonnet to Mrs. Leo Hunter on her breakfasts, feelingly and originally observed." "Was he celebrated for his works and talents?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "He was, sir," replied the grave man, "all Mrs. Leo Hunter's acquaintances are. It is her ambition, sir, to have no other acquaintance." "It is a very noble ambition," said Mr. Pickwick. "When I inform Mrs. Leo Hunter that that remark fell from your lips, sir, she will indeed be proud," said the grave man. "You have a gentleman in your train who has produced some beautiful little poems, I think, sir." "My friend Mr. Snodgrass has a great taste for poetry," replied Mr. Pickwick. "So has Mrs. Leo Hunter, sir." "She dotes on poetry, sir." "She adores it. I may say that her whole soul and mind are wound up and entwined with it. She has produced some delightful pieces herself, sir. You may have met with her Ode to an Expiring Frog, sir." "I don't think I have," said Mr. Pickwick. "You astonish me, sir," said Mr. Leo Hunter. It created an immense sensation. It was signed with an 50 and 8 stars, and appeared originally in a ladies' magazine. It commenced, "Can I view thee panting, lying on thy stomach without sighing? Can I unmoved see thee dying on a log expiring frog?" "Beautiful," said Mr. Pickwick. "Fine," said Mr. Leo Hunter, "so simple." "Very," said Mr. Pickwick. "The next verse is still more touching." "Shall I repeat it?" "If you please," said Mr. Pickwick. "It runs thus," said the grave man, still more gravely. "Say, have fiends in shape of boys, with wild halloo and brutal noise, hunted thee from marshy joys with a dog expiring frog." "Finely expressed," said Mr. Pickwick. "All point, sir," said Mr. Leo Hunter, "but you shall hear Mrs. Leo Hunter repeat it." "She can do justice to it, sir." "She will repeat it in character, sir, tomorrow morning." "In character." "As Minerva." "But I forgot it's a fancy dress de June." "Dear me," said Mr. Pickwick, glancing at his own figure, "I can't possibly." "Can't, sir, can't," exclaimed Mr. Leo Hunter. "Solomon Lucas, the Jew in the High Street, has thousands of fancy dresses. Consider, sir, how many appropriate characters are open for your selection. Plato, Zeno, Epicurus, Pythagoras, all founders of clubs." "I know that," said Mr. Pickwick. "But as I cannot put myself in competition with those great men, I cannot presume to wear their dresses." The grave man considered deeply, for a few seconds, and then said, "On reflection, sir, I don't know whether it would not afford Mrs. Leo Hunter greater pleasure if her guests saw a gentleman of your celebrity in his own costume, rather than in an assumed one. I may venture to promise an exception in your case, sir. Yes, I am quite certain that, on behalf of Mrs. Leo Hunter, I may venture to do so." "In that case," said Mr. Pickwick, "I shall have great pleasure in coming." "But I waste your time, sir," said the grave man, as if suddenly recollecting himself. "I know its value, sir. I will not detain you. I may tell Mrs. Leo Hunter, then, that she may confidently expect you and your distinguished friends. Good morning, sir. I am proud to have beheld so eminent a personage. Not a step, sir. Not a word." And without giving Mr. Pickwick time to offer remonstrance or denial, Mr. Leo Hunter stalked gravely away. Mr. Pickwick took up his hat and repaired to the Peacock, but Mr. Winkle had conveyed the intelligence of the fancy ball there, before him. "Mrs. Potts going," were the first words with which he saluted his leader. "Is she?" said Mr. Pickwick. "As Apollo," replied Winkle. "Only Pot objects to the tunic." "He is right." "He is quite right," said Mr. Pickwick emphatically. "Yes, so she's going to wear a white satin gown with gold spangles." "They'll hardly know what she's meant for, will they?" inquired Mr. Snodgrass. "Of course they will," replied Mr. Winkle indignantly. "They'll see her lyre, won't they?" "True, I forgot that," said Mr. Snodgrass. "I shall go as a bandit," interposed Mr. Tupman. "What?" said Mr. Pickwick with a sudden start. "As a bandit," repeated Mr. Tupman mildly. "You don't mean to say," said Mr. Pickwick, gazing with solemn sternness at his friend, "you don't mean to say, Mr. Tupman, that it is your intention to put yourself into a green velvet jacket with a 2-inch tail?" "Such is my intention, sir," replied Mr. Tupman warmly. "And why not, sir?" "Because, sir," said Mr. Pickwick, considerably excited, "because you are too old, sir." "Too old?" exclaimed Mr. Tupman. "And if any further ground of objection be wanting," continued Mr. Pickwick, "you are too fat, sir." "Sir," said Mr. Tupman, his face suffused with a crimson glow, "this is an insult." "Sir," replied Mr. Pickwick, in the same tone, "it is not half the insult to you that your appearance in my presence in a green velvet jacket with a 2-inch tail would be to me." "Sir," said Mr. Tupman, "you're a fellow." "Sir," said Mr. Pickwick, "you're another." Mr. Tupman advanced a step or two and glared at Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Pickwick returned the glare, concentrated into a focus by means of his spectacles, and breathed a bold defiance. Mr. Snodgrass and Mr. Winkle looked on, petrified at beholding such a scene between two such men. "Sir," said Mr. Tupman, after a short pause, speaking in a low, deep voice, "you have called me old." "I have," said Mr. Pickwick. "And fat." "I reiterate the charge." "And a fellow." "So you are." There was a fearful pause. "My attachment to your person, sir," said Mr. Tupman, speaking in a voice tremulous with emotion and tucking up his wristbands meanwhile, "is great, very great, but upon that person I must take summary vengeance." "Come on, sir," replied Mr. Pickwick. Stimulated by the exciting nature of the dialogue, the heroic man actually threw himself into a paralytic attitude, confidently supposed by the two bystanders to have been intended as a posture of defense. "What?" exclaimed Mr. Snodgrass, suddenly recovering the power of speech, of which intense astonishment had previously bereft him, and rushing between the two, at the imminent hazard of receiving an application on the temple from each. "What?" "Mr. Pickwick, with the eyes of the world upon you. Mr. Tupman, who, in common with us all, derives a luster from his undying name. For shame, gentlemen, for shame." The unwonted lines which momentary passion had ruled in Mr. Pickwick's clear and open brow gradually melted away, as his young friend spoke, like the marks of a black-lead pencil beneath the softening influence of india-rubber. His countenance had resumed its usual benign expression ere he concluded. "I have been hasty," said Mr. Pickwick, "very hasty." "Tupman, your hand." The dark shadow passed from Mr. Tupman's face as he warmly grasped the hand of his friend. "I have been hasty, too," said he. "No, no," interrupted Mr. Pickwick, "the fault was mine. You will wear the green velvet jacket." "No, no," replied Mr. Tupman. "To oblige me, you will," resumed Mr. Pickwick. "Well, well, I will," said Mr. Tupman. It was accordingly settled that Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Snodgrass should all wear fancy dresses. Thus Mr. Pickwick was led by the very warmth of his own good feelings to give his consent to a proceeding from which his better judgment would have recoiled a more striking illustration of his amiable character, could hardly have been conceived, even if the events recorded in these pages had been wholly imaginary. Mr. Leo Hunter had not exaggerated the resources of Mr. Solomon Lucas. His wardrobe was extensive, very extensive, not strictly classical perhaps, not quite new, nor did it contain any one garment made precisely after the fashion of any age or time, but everything was more or less spangled. And what can be prettier than spangles? It may be objected that they are not adapted to the daylight, but everybody knows that they would glitter if there were lamps. And nothing can be clearer than that if people give fancy balls in the daytime, and the dresses do not show quite as well as they would by night. The fault lies solely with the people who give the fancy balls, and is in no wise chargeable on the spangles. Such was the convincing reasoning of Mr. Solomon Lucas, and influenced by such arguments did Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, and Mr. Snodgrass engage to array themselves in costumes which his taste and experience induced him to recommend as admirably suited to the occasion. A carriage was hired from the town arms for the accommodation of the Pickwickians, and a chariot was ordered from the same repository for the purpose of conveying Mr. and Mrs. Pot to Mrs. Leo Hunter's grounds, which Mr. Pot, as a delicate acknowledgment of having received an invitation, had already confidently predicted in the Eatanswill Gazette, would present a scene of varied and delicious enchantment, a bewildering coruscation of beauty and talent, a lavish and prodigal display of hospitality above all, a degree of splendor softened by the most exquisite taste, an adornment refined with perfect harmony, and the chastest good keeping compared with which the fabled gorgeousness of Eastern fairyland itself would appear to be clothed in as many dark and murky colors, as must be the mind of the splenetic and unmanly being who could presume to taint with the venom of his envy the preparations made by the virtuous and highly distinguished lady at whose shrine this humble tribute of admiration was offered. This last was a piece of biting sarcasm against the Independent, who, in consequence of not having been invited at all, had been, through 4 numbers, affecting to sneer at the whole affair in his very largest type, with all the adjectives in capital letters. The morning came. It was a pleasant sight to behold Mr. Tupman in full brigand's costume, with a very tight jacket, sitting like a pincushion over his back and shoulders, the upper portion of his legs encased in the velvet shorts, and the lower part thereof swathed in the complicated bandages to which all brigands are peculiarly attached. It was pleasing to see his open and ingenuous countenance, well mustachioed and corked, looking out from an open shirt collar, and to contemplate the sugar-loaf hat, decorated with ribbons of all colors, which he was compelled to carry on his knee, inasmuch as no known conveyance with a top to it would admit of any man's carrying it between his head and the roof. Equally humorous and agreeable was the appearance of Mr. Snodgrass in blue satin trunks and cloak, white silk tights and shoes, and Grecian helmet, which everybody knows. And if they do not, Mr. Solomon Lucas did, to have been the regular, authentic, everyday costume of a troubadour, from the earliest ages down to the time of their final disappearance from the face of the earth. All this was pleasant, but this was as nothing compared with the shouting of the populace when the carriage drew up, behind Mr. Pot's chariot, which chariot itself drew up at Mr. Pot's door, which door itself opened, and displayed the great Pot accoutred as a Russian officer of justice, with a tremendous knout in his hand tastefully typical of the stern and mighty power of the Eatanswill Gazette, and the fearful lashings it bestowed on public offenders. "Bravo!" shouted Mr. Tupman and Mr. Snodgrass from the passage when they beheld the walking allegory. "Bravo!" Mr. Pickwick was heard to exclaim from the passage. "Hooror, Pot!" shouted the populace. Amid these salutations, Mr. Pot, smiling with that kind of bland dignity which sufficiently testified that he felt his power, and knew how to exert it, got into the chariot. Then there emerged from the house Mrs. Pot, who would have looked very like Apollo if she hadn't had a gown on, conducted by Mr. Winkle, who, in his light red coat, could not possibly have been mistaken for anything but a sportsman, if he had not borne an equal resemblance to a general postman. Last of all came Mr. Pickwick, whom the boys applauded as loud as anybody, probably under the impression that his tights and gaiters were some remnants of the Dark Ages, and then the two vehicles proceeded towards Mrs. Leo Hunter S., Mr. Weller, who was to assist in waiting, being stationed on the box of that in which his master was seated. Every one of the men, women, boys, girls, and babies who were assembled to see the visitors in their fancy dresses screamed with delight and ecstasy when Mr. Pickwick, with the brigand on one arm and the troubadour on the other, walked solemnly up the entrance. Never were such shouts heard as those which greeted Mr. Tupman's efforts to fix the sugar loaf hat on his head, by way of entering the garden in style. The preparations were on the most delightful scale, fully realizing the prophetic pot's anticipations about the gorgeousness of Eastern fairyland, and at once affording a sufficient contradiction to the malignant statements of the reptile independent. The grounds were more than 1.25 acres in extent, and they were filled with people. Never was such a blaze of beauty, and fashion and literature. There was the young lady who did the poetry in the Eatanswill Gazette, in the garb of a sultana, leaning upon the arm of the young gentleman who did the review department, and who was appropriately habited in a field marshal's uniform, the boots excepted. There were hosts of these geniuses, and any reasonable person would have thought it honor enough to meet them. But more than these, there were 6 lions from London authors, real authors, who had written whole books, and printed them afterwards, and here you might see M. walking about, like ordinary men, smiling and talking pretty considerable nonsense too, no doubt with the benign intention of rendering themselves intelligible to the common people about them. Moreover, there was a band of music in pasteboard caps, 4 somethingian singers in the costume of their country, and 12 hired waiters in the costume of their country, and very dirty costume too. And above all, there was Mrs. Leo Hunter in the character of Minerva, receiving the company, and overflowing with pride and gratification at the notion of having called such distinguished individuals together. "Mr. Pickwick, ma'am," said a servant, as that gentleman approached the presiding goddess with his hat in his hand and the brigand and troubadour on either arm. "What? Where?" exclaimed Mrs. Leo Hunter, starting up, in an affected rapture of surprise. "Here," said Mr. Pickwick. "Is it possible that I have really the gratification of beholding Mr. Pickwick himself?" ejaculated Mrs. Leo Hunter. "No other, ma'am," replied Mr. Pickwick, bowing very low. "Permit me to introduce my friends Mr. Tupman, Mr. Winkle, Mr. Snodgrass, to the authoress of The Expiring Frog." Very few people but those who have tried it know what a difficult process it is to bow in green velvet smalls and a tight jacket and high-crowned hat, or in blue satin trunks and white silks, or knee cords and top boots that were never made for the wearer, and have been fixed upon him without the remotest reference to the comparative dimensions of himself and the suit. Never were such distortions as Mr. Tupman's frame underwent in his efforts to appear easy and graceful. Never was such ingenious posturing as his fancy-dressed friends exhibited. "Mr. Pickwick," said Mrs. Leo Hunter, "I must make you promise not to stir from my side the whole day. There are hundreds of people here that I must positively introduce you to." "You are very kind, ma'am," said Mr. Pickwick. "In the first place, here are my little girls. I had almost forgotten them," said Minerva, carelessly pointing towards a couple of full-grown young ladies, of whom one might be about 20 and the other a year or 2 older, and who were dressed in very juvenile costumes. Whether to make them look young, or their mamma younger, Mr. Pickwick does not distinctly inform us. "They are very beautiful," said Mr. Pickwick, as the juveniles turned away after being presented. "They are very like their mamma, sir," said Mr. Pott majestically. "Oh, you naughty man," exclaimed Mrs. Leo Hunter, playfully tapping the editor's arm with her fan, Minerva with a fan. "Why now, my dear Mrs. Hunter," said Mr. Pott, who was trumpeter in ordinary at the Den, "you know that when your picture was in the exhibition of the Royal Academy last year, everybody inquired whether it was intended for you or your youngest daughter, for you were so much alike that there was no telling the difference between you." "Well, and if they did, why need you repeat it before strangers?" said Mrs. Leo Hunter, bestowing another tap on the slumbering lion of the Eatanswill Gazette. "Count, count," screamed Mrs. Leo Hunter to a well-whiskered individual in a foreign uniform who was passing by. You want me, said the Count, turning back. I want to introduce two very clever people to each other, said Mrs. Leo Hunter. Mr. Pickwick, I have great pleasure in introducing you to Count Smorltork. She added in a hurried whisper to Mr. Pickwick, the famous foreigner gathering materials for his great work on England Hem, Count Smorltork, Mr. Pickwick. Mr. Pickwick saluted the Count with all the reverence due to so great a man, and the Count drew forth a set of tablets. What you say, Mrs. Hunt? Inquired the Count, smiling graciously on the gratified Mrs. Leo Hunter, Pig Vig or Big Vig, what you call lawyer, eh? I see that is it. Big Vig. And the Count was proceeding to enter Mr. Pickwick in his tablets, as a gentleman of the long robe, who derived his name from the profession to which he belonged, when Mrs. Leo Hunter interposed. No, no, Count, said the lady Pickwick. I see, replied the Count. P. Christian name, Weeks surname, good ver good. Peak Weeks. How you do, Weeks? Quite well, I thank you, replied Mr. Pickwick with all his usual affability. Have you been long in England? Long time fortnight more. Do you stay here long? 1 week. You will have enough to do, said Mr. Pickwick, smiling, to gather all the materials you want in that time. They are gathered, said the Count. Indeed, said Mr. Pickwick. They are here, added the Count, tapping his forehead significantly. Large book at home full of notes, music, picture, science, pottery, politic, all things. The word politics, sir, said Mr. Pickwick, comprises in itself a difficult study of no inconsiderable magnitude. Ah, said the Count, drawing out the tablets again, ver good fine words to begin a chapter. Chapter 47. Politics. The word politic surprises by himself. And down went Mr. Pickwick's remark, in Count Smorltork's tablets, with such variations and additions as the Count's exuberant fancy suggested, or his imperfect knowledge of the language occasioned. Count, said Mrs. Leo Hunter. Mrs. Hunt, replied the Count. This is Mr. Snodgrass, a friend of Mr. Pickwick S. and a poet. Stop, exclaimed the Count, bringing out the tablets once more. Head pottery chapter, literary friend's name Snodgrass, ver good. Introduced to Snodgrass, great poet, friend of Peak Weeks by Mrs. Hunt, which wrote other sweet poem, what is that name? Fog perspiring, fog ver good indeed. And the Count put up his tablets, and with sundry bows and acknowledgments walked away, thoroughly satisfied that he had made the most important and valuable additions to his stock of information. Wonderful man, Count Smorltork, said Mrs. Leo Hunter. Sound philosopher, said Mr. Pott. Clear-headed, strong-minded person, added Mr. Snodgrass. A chorus of bystanders took up the shout of Count Smorltork's praise, shook their heads sagely, and unanimously cried, very. As the enthusiasm in Count Smorltork's favor ran very high, his praises might have been sung until the end of the festivities, if the 4 Somethingnian singers had not ranged themselves in front of a small apple tree to look picturesque, and commenced singing their national songs, which appeared by no means difficult of execution, inasmuch as the grand secret seemed to be that 3 of the Somethingnian singers should grunt, while the 4th howled. This interesting performance having concluded amidst the loud plaudits of the whole company, a boy forthwith proceeded to entangle himself with the rails of a chair, and to jump over it and crawl under it and fall down with it, and do everything but sit upon it, and then to make a cravat of his legs and tie them round his neck. And then to illustrate the ease with which a human being can be made to look like a magnified tow doll, which feats yielded high delight and satisfaction to the assembled spectators. After which the voice of Mrs. Pott was heard to chirp faintly forth something which courtesy interpreted into a song, which was all very classical and strictly in character, because Apollo was himself a composer, and composers can very seldom sing their own music or anybody else's either. This was succeeded by Mrs. Leo Hunter's recitation of her far-famed Ode to an Expiring Frog, which was encored once, and would have been encored twice if the major part of the guests, who thought it was high time to get something to eat, had not said that it was perfectly shameful to take advantage of Mrs. Hunter's good nature. So although Mrs. Leo Hunter professed her perfect willingness to recite the ode again, her kind and considerate friends wouldn't hear of it on any account. And the refreshment room being thrown open, all the people who had ever been there before scrambled in with all possible dispatch. Mrs. Leo Hunter's usual course of proceedings being to issue cards for 100 and breakfast for 50, or in other words to feed only the very particular lions, and let the smaller animals take care of themselves. "Where is Mr. Pot?" said Mrs. Leo Hunter, as she placed the aforesaid lions around her. "Here I am," said the editor, from the remotest end of the room, far beyond all hope of food unless something was done for him by the hostess. "Won't you come up here?" "Oh, pray don't mind him," said Mrs. Pot in the most obliging voice. "You give yourself a great deal of unnecessary trouble, Mrs. Hunter. You'll do very well there, won't you, dear?" "Certainly, love," replied the unhappy Pot with a grim smile. Alas for the knout. The nervous arm that wielded it, with such a gigantic force on public characters, was paralyzed beneath the glance of the imperious Mrs. Pot. Mrs. Leo Hunter looked round her in triumph. Count Smorltork was busily engaged in taking notes of the contents of the dishes. Mr. Tupman was doing the honors of the lobster salad to several lionesses, with a degree of grace which no brigand ever exhibited before. Mr. Snodgrass, having cut out the young gentleman who cut up the books for the Eatanswill Gazette, was engaged in an impassioned argument with the young lady who did the poetry, and Mr. Pickwick was making himself universally agreeable. Nothing seemed wanting to render the select circle complete, when Mr. Leo Hunter, whose department on these occasions was to stand about in doorways and talk to the less important people, suddenly called out, "My dear, here's Mr. Charles Fitzmarshall." "Oh dear," said Mrs. Leo Hunter, "how anxiously I have been expecting him. Pray make room to let Mr. Fitzmarshall pass. Tell Mr. Fitzmarshall, my dear, to come up to me directly, to be scolded for coming so late." "Coming, my dear ma'am," cried a voice, "as quick as I can, crowds of people full room hard work very." Mr. Pickwick's knife and fork fell from his hand. He stared across the table at Mr. Tupman, who had dropped his knife and fork, and was looking as if he were about to sink into the ground without further notice. "Ah," cried the voice, as its owner pushed his way among the last 25 Turks, officers, cavaliers, and Charles II's, that remained between him and the table, "regular mangle-baker's patent, not a crease in my coat. After all this squeezing might have got up my linen as I came along, ha. Huh. Not a bad idea, that queer thing to have it mangled when it's upon one, though trying process very." With these broken words, a young man dressed as a naval officer made his way up to the table, and presented to the astonished Pickwickians the identical form and features of Mr. Alfred Jingle. The offender had barely time to take Mrs. Leo Hunter's proffered hand, when his eyes encountered the indignant orbs of Mr. Pickwick. "Hallo," said Jingle. "Quite forgot no directions to postilion give, at once back in a minute." "The servant, or Mr. Hunter will do it in a moment, Mr. Fitzmarshall," said Mrs. Leo Hunter. No, I'll do it, shan't be long back in no time," replied Jingle. With these words, he disappeared among the crowd. "Will you allow me to ask you, ma'am," said the excited Mr. Pickwick, rising from his seat, "who that young man is and where he resides?" "He is a gentleman of fortune, Mr. Pickwick," said Mrs. Leo Hunter, "to whom I very much want to introduce you. The Count will be delighted with him." Yes, said Mr. Pickwick hastily. "His residence is at present at the Angel at Bury." "At Bury?" "At Bury St. Edmunds, not many miles from here." "But dear me, Mr. Pickwick, you are not going to leave us. Surely, Mr. Pickwick, you cannot think of going so soon." But long before Mrs. Leo Hunter had finished speaking, Mr. Pickwick had plunged through the throng and reached the garden, whither he was shortly afterwards joined by Mr. Tupman, who had followed his friend closely. "It's of no use," said Mr. Tupman. "He has gone." "I know it," said Mr. Pickwick, "and I will follow him." "Follow him? Where?" inquired Mr. Tupman. "To the Angel at Bury," replied Mr. Pickwick, speaking very quickly. How do we know whom he is deceiving there? He deceived a worthy man once, and we were the innocent cause. He shall not do it again if I can help it. I'll expose him. Sam, where's my servant? Here you are, sir, said Mr. Weller, emerging from a sequestered spot, where he had been engaged in discussing a bottle of Madeira, which he had abstracted from the breakfast table an hour or two before. Here's your servant, sir. Proud o' the title, as the living skeleton said, ven they showed him. Follow me instantly, said Mr. Pickwick. Tupman, if I stay at Bury, you can join me there when I write. Till then, goodbye. Remonstrances were useless. Mr. Pickwick was roused, and his mind was made up. Mr. Tupman returned to his companions, and in another hour had drowned all present recollection of Mr. Alfred Jingle or Mr. Charles Fitzmarshall in an exhilarating quadrille and a bottle of champagne. By that time, Mr. Pickwick and Sam Weller, perched on the outside of a stagecoach, were every succeeding minute placing a less and less distance between themselves and the good old town of Bury St. Edmunds. Chapter 16. Too full of adventure to be briefly described. There is no month in the whole year in which nature wears a more beautiful appearance than in the month of August. Spring has many beauties, and May is a fresh and blooming month, but the charms of this time of year are enhanced by their contrast with the winter season. August has no such advantage. It comes when we remember nothing but clear skies, green fields, and sweet-smelling flowers when the recollection of snow, and ice and bleak winds has faded from our minds as completely as they have disappeared from the earth end, yet what a pleasant time it is. Orchards and cornfields ring with the hum of labor. Trees bend beneath the thick clusters of rich fruit which bow their branches to the ground. And the corn, piled in graceful sheaves, or waving in every light breath that sweeps above it, as if it wooed the sickle, tinges the landscape with a golden hue. A mellow softness appears to hang over the whole earth. The influence of the season seems to extend itself to the very wagon, whose slow motion across the well-reaped field is perceptible only to the eye, but strikes with no harsh sound upon the ear. As the coach rolls swiftly past the fields and orchards which skirt the road, groups of women and children, piling the fruit in sieves, or gathering the scattered ears of corn, pause for an instant from their labor, and shading the sunburned face with a still browner hand, gaze upon the passengers with curious eyes, while some stout urchin, too small to work, but too mischievous to be left at home, scrambles over the side of the basket in which he has been deposited for security, and kicks and screams with delight. The reaper stops in his work and stands with folded arms, looking at the vehicle as it whirls past, and the rough cart horses bestow a sleepy glance upon the smart coach team, which says as plainly as a horse's glance can, "It's all very fine to look at, but slow going over a heavy field is better than warm work like that upon a dusty road after all." You cast a look behind you as you turn a corner of the road. The women and children have resumed their labor. The reaper once more stoops to his work. The cart horses have moved on, and all are again in motion. The influence of a scene like this was not lost upon the well-regulated mind of Mr. Pickwick. Intent upon the resolution he had formed of exposing the real character of the nefarious Jingle in any quarter in which he might be pursuing his fraudulent designs, he sat at first taciturn and contemplative, brooding over the means by which his purpose could be best attained. By degrees, his attention grew more and more attracted by the objects around him, and at last he derived as much enjoyment from the ride as if it had been undertaken for the pleasantest reason in the world. "Delightful prospect, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "Beats the chimbley pots, sir," replied Mr. Weller, touching his hat. "I suppose you have hardly seen anything but chimney pots and bricks and mortar all your life, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, smiling. "I warn't always a boots, sir," said Mr. Weller with a shake of the head. "I was a Vaginer's boy once." "When was that?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "When I was first pitched neck and crop into the world, to play at leap-frog with its troubles," replied Sam. "I was a carrier's boy at Starton, then a Vaginer's, then a helper, then a boots. Now I'm a gentleman's servant. I shall be a gentleman myself one of these days, perhaps, with a pipe in my mouth and a summer house in the back garden. Who knows? I shouldn't be surprised for one." "You are quite a philosopher, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "It runs in the family, I believe, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "My father's worry much in that line now. If my mother-in-law blows him up, he whistles. She flies in a passion and breaks his pipe. He steps out and gets another. Then she screams worry loud and falls into hysterics, and he smokes worry comfortably till she comes to again. That's philosophy, sir, ain't it?" "A very good substitute for it, at all events," replied Mr. Pickwick, laughing. "It must have been of great service to you in the course of your rambling life, Sam." "Service, sir," exclaimed Sam. "You may say that. Arter I run away from the carrier, and afore I took up with the vaginer, I had unfurnished lodgin' for a fortnight." "Unfurnished lodgings," said Mr. Pickwick. "Yes, the dry arches of Waterloo Bridge. Fine sleeping place within 10 minutes. Walk of all the public offices only, if there is any objection to it, it is that the sitivation's rather too airy. I see some queer sights there." "Ah, I suppose you did," said Mr. Pickwick, with an air of considerable interest. "Sights, sir," resumed Mr. Weller, "as 'ud penetrate your benevolent heart and come out on the other side. You don't see the reglar wagrants there, trust they knows better than that. Young beggars, male and female, as hasn't made a rise in their profession, takes up their quarters there sometimes. But it's generally the worn-out, starving, houseless creeters as roll themselves in the dark corners them lonesome places poor creeters as ain't up to the tuppenny rope." "And pray, Sam, what is the tuppenny rope?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "The tuppenny rope, sir," replied Mr. Weller, "is just a cheap lodgin' house, where the beds is tuppence a night." "What do they call a bed a rope for?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Bless your innocence, sir, that ain't it," replied Sam. "Ven the lady and gentleman as keeps the hotel first begun business, they used to make the beds on the floor, but this wouldn't do at no price. 'Cause instead taking a moderate tupanorth sleep, the lodgers used to lie there half the day. So now they has 2 ropes, 'bout 6 foot apart, and 3 from the floor, which goes right down the room, and the beds are made of slips of coarse sacking, stretched across "Well," said Mr. Pickwick. "Well," said Mr. Weller, "the advantage the plan's hobvious. At 6 o'clock every mornin', they lets go the ropes at one end, and down falls the lodgers. Consequence is, that being thoroughly waked, they get up worry quietly and walk away." "Beg your pardon, sir," said Sam, suddenly breaking off in his loquacious discourse. "Is this Barry St. Edmunds?" "It is," replied Mr. Pickwick. The coach rattled through the well-paved streets of a handsome little town, of thriving and cleanly appearance, and stopped before a large inn situated in a wide open street, nearly facing the old abbey. "And this," said Mr. Pickwick, looking up, "is the Angel. We alight here, Sam. But some caution is necessary. Order a private room, and do not mention my name. You understand." "Right as a trivet, sir," replied Mr. Weller, with a wink of intelligence, and having dragged Mr. Pickwick's portmanteau from the hind boot, into which it had been hastily thrown when they joined the coach at Eatanswill, Mr. Weller disappeared on his errand. A private room was speedily engaged, and into it Mr. Pickwick was ushered without delay. "Now, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, "the first thing to be done is to—" "Order dinner, sir," interposed Mr. Weller. "It's worry late, sir." "Ah, so it is," said Mr. Pickwick, looking at his watch. "You are right, Sam. And if I might adwise, sir," added Mr. Weller, "I'd just have a good night's rest arterwards, and not begin inquiring arter this here deep, until the mornin'. There's nothin' so refreshin' as sleep, sir, as the servant girl said afore she drank the egg cupful of laudanum." "I think you are right, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "But I must first ascertain that he is in the house, and not likely to go away." "Leave that to me, sir," said Sam. "Let me order you a snug little dinner, and make my inquiries below while it's a-getting ready. I could worm every secret out the boots's heart in 5 minutes, sir." "Do so," said Mr. Pickwick, and Mr. Weller at once retired. In half an hour, Mr. Pickwick was seated at a very satisfactory dinner, and, in 3/4, Mr. Weller returned with the intelligence that Mr. Charles Fitzmarshall had ordered his private room to be retained for him, until further notice. He was going to spend the evening at some private house in the neighborhood, had ordered the boots to sit up until his return, and had taken his servant with him. "Now, sir," argued Mr. Weller, when he had concluded his report, "if I can get a talk with this here servant in the mornin', he'll tell me all his master's concerns." "How do you know that?" interposed Mr. Pickwick. "Bless your heart, sir, servants always do," replied Mr. Weller. "Oh, I forgot that," said Mr. Pickwick. "Well, then you can arrange what's best to be done, sir, and we can act accordingly." As it appeared that this was the best arrangement that could be made, it was finally agreed upon. Mr. Weller, by his master's permission, retired to spend the evening in his own way, and was shortly afterwards elected, by the unanimous voice of the assembled company, into the taproom chair, in which honorable post he acquitted himself so much to the satisfaction of the gentlemen frequenters, that their roars of laughter and approbation penetrated to Mr. Pickwick's bedroom, and shortened the term of his natural rest by at least 3 hours. Early on the ensuing morning, Mr. Weller was dispelling all the feverish remains of the previous evening's conviviality through the instrumentality of a halfpenny shower bath, having induced a young gentleman attached to the stable department, by the offer of that coin, to pump over his head and face until he was perfectly restored, when he was attracted by the appearance of a young fellow in mulberry-colored livery, who was sitting on a bench in the yard, reading what appeared to be a hymn book, with an air of deep abstraction, but who occasionally stole a glance at the individual under the pump, as if he took some interest in his proceedings, nevertheless. "You're a rum un to look at, you are," thought Mr. Weller, the first time his eyes encountered the glance of the stranger in the mulberry suit, who had a large, sallow, ugly face, very sunken eyes, and a gigantic head, from which depended a quantity of lank black hair. "You're a rum un," thought Mr. Weller, and thinking this, he went on washing himself and thought no more about him. Still the man kept glancing from his hymn book to Sam, and from Sam to his hymn book, as if he wanted to open a conversation. So at last, Sam, by way of giving him an opportunity, said with a familiar nod, "How are you, governor?" "I am happy to say I am pretty well, sir," said the man, speaking with great deliberation and closing the book. "I hope you're the same, sir." "Why, if I felt less like a walking brandy bottle, I shouldn't be quite so staggery this mornin'," replied Sam. "Are you stoppin' in this house, old un?" The mulberry man replied in the affirmative. "How was it you warn't one of us last night?" inquired Sam, scrubbing his face with the towel. "You seem one of the jolly sort, looks as convivial as a live trout in a lime basket," added Mr. Weller in an undertone. "I was out last night with my master," replied the stranger. "What's his name?" inquired Mr. Weller, coloring up very red with sudden excitement and the friction of the towel combined. "Fitz-Marshall," said the mulberry man. "Give us your hand," said Mr. Weller, advancing. "I should like to know you." "I like your appearance, old fellow." "Well, that is very strange," said the mulberry man, with great simplicity of manner. "I like yours so much that I wanted to speak to you, from the very first moment I saw you under the pump." "Did you, though?" "Upon my word." "Now, isn't that curious?" "Worry singler," said Sam, inwardly congratulating himself upon the softness of the stranger. "What's your name, my patriarch?" "Job." "And a worry good name it is, only one I know that ain't got a nickname to it." "What's the other name?" "Trotter," said the stranger. "What is yours?" Sam bore in mind his master's caution, and replied, "My name's Walker, my master's name's Wilkins." "Will you take a drop o' somethin' this mornin', Mr. Trotter?" Mr. Trotter acquiesced in this agreeable proposal, and having deposited his book in his coat pocket, accompanied Mr. Weller to the tap, where they were soon occupied in discussing an exhilarating compound, formed by mixing together, in a pewter vessel, certain quantities of British Hollands and the fragrant essence of the clove. "And what sort of a place have you got?" inquired Sam, as he filled his companion's glass for the second time. "Bad," said Job, smacking his lips, "very bad." "You don't mean that," said Sam. "I do, indeed." "Worse than that, my master is going to be married." "No." "Yes, and worse than that, too. He's going to run away with an immense rich heiress from boarding school." "What a dragon," said Sam, refilling his companion's glass. "It's some boarding school in this town, I suppose, ain't it? Now, Although this question was put in the most careless tone imaginable, Mr. Jobtrotter plainly showed by gestures that he perceived his new friend's anxiety to draw forth an answer to it. He emptied his glass, looked mysteriously at his companion, winked both of his small eyes, one after the other, and finally made a motion with his arm, as if he were working an imaginary pump handle, thereby intimating that he, Mr. Trotter, considered himself as undergoing the process of being pumped by Mr. Samuel Weller. "No, no," said Mr. Trotter in conclusion, "that's not to be told to everybody. That is a great secret, Mr. Walker." As the mulberry man said this, he turned his glass upside down, by way of reminding his companion that he had nothing left wherewith to slake his thirst. Sam observed the hint, and feeling the delicate manner in which it was conveyed, ordered the pewter vessel to be refilled, whereat the small eyes of the mulberry man glistened. "And so it's a secret," said Sam. "I should rather suspect it was," said the mulberry man, sipping his liquor with a complacent face. "I suppose your masters worry rich," said Sam. Mr. Trotter smiled, and holding his glass in his left hand, gave 4 distinct slaps on the pockets of his mulberry indescribables with his right, as if to intimate that his master might have done the same without alarming anybody much by the chinking of coin. "Ah," said Sam, "that's the game, is it?" The mulberry man nodded significantly. "Well, and don't you think, old feller," remonstrated Mr. Weller, "that if you let your master take in this here young lady, you're a precious rascal?" "I know that," said Job Trotter, turning upon his companion a countenance of deep contrition and groaning slightly. "I know that, and that's what it is that preys upon my mind. But what am I to do?" "Do," said Sam, "divulge to the missus and give up your master." "Who'd believe me?" replied Job Trotter. The young ladies considered the very picture of innocence and discretion. "She'd deny it, and so would my master." "Who'd believe me?" "I should lose my place and get indicted for a conspiracy or some such thing. That's all I should take by my motion." "There's somethin' in that," said Sam, ruminating. "There's somethin' in that. If I knew any respectable gentleman who would take the matter up," continued Mr. Trotter, "I might have some hope of preventing the elopement, but there's the same difficulty, Mr. Walker, just the same. I know no gentleman in this strange place, and 10 to 1 if I did, whether he would believe my story." "Come this way," said Sam, suddenly jumping up and grasping the mulberry man by the arm. "My master's the man you want, I see." And after a slight resistance on the part of Job Trotter, Sam led his newly found friend to the apartment of Mr. Pickwick, to whom he presented him, together with a brief summary of the dialogue we have just repeated. "I am very sorry to betray my master, sir," said Job Trotter, applying to his eyes a pink checked pocket handkerchief about 6 inches square. "The feeling does you a great deal of honor," replied Mr. Pickwick, "but it is your duty, nevertheless." "I know it is my duty, sir," replied Job with great emotion. "We should all try to discharge our duty, sir, and I humbly endeavor to discharge mine, sir. But it is a hard trial to betray a master, sir, whose clothes you wear and whose bread you eat, even though he is a scoundrel, sir." "You are a very good fellow," said Mr. Pickwick, much affected, "an honest fellow." "Come, come," interposed Sam, who had witnessed Mr. Trotter's tears with considerable impatience, "blow this air water-cart business. It won't do no good, this won't." "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick reproachfully, "I am sorry to find that you have so little respect for this young man's feelings." "His feelin' is all worry well, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "And as they're so worry fine, and it's a pity he should lose I think he'd better keep in his own bosom than let evaporate in hot water, specially as they do no good. Tears never yet wound up a clock or worked a steam engine. The next time you go out to a smoking party, young fellow, fill your pipe with that air reflection. And for the present just put that bit of pink gingham into your pocket. 'Tain't so handsome that you need keep waving it about, as if you was a tightrope dancer." "My man is in the right," said Mr. Pickwick, accosting Job, although his mode of expressing his opinion is somewhat homely and occasionally incomprehensible. "He is, sir, very right," said Mr. Trotter, "and I will give way no longer." "Very well," said Mr. Pickwick. "Now, where is this boarding school?" "It is a large, old red brick house, just outside the town, sir," replied Job Trotter. "And when," said Mr. Pickwick, "when is this villainous design to be carried into execution? When is this elopement to take place?" "Tonight, sir," replied Job. "Tonight!" exclaimed Mr. Pickwick. "This very night, sir," replied Job Trotter. "That is what alarms me so much." "Instant measures must be taken," said Mr. Pickwick. "I will see the lady who keeps the establishment immediately." "I beg your pardon, sir," said Job, "but that course of proceeding will never do." "Why not?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "My master, sir, is a very artful man." "I know he is," said Mr. Pickwick. "And he has so wound himself round the old lady's heart, sir," resumed Job, "that she would believe nothing to his prejudice if you went down on your bare knees and swore it. Especially as you have no proof but the word of a servant who, for anything she knows, and my master would be sure to say so, was discharged for some fault and does this in revenge." "What had better be done then?" said Mr. Pickwick. "Nothing but taking him in the very act of eloping will convince the old lady, sir," replied Job. "All them old cats will run their heads agin milestones," observed Mr. Weller in a parenthesis. "But this taking him in the very act of elopement would be a very difficult thing to accomplish, I fear," said Mr. Pickwick. "I don't know, sir," said Mr. Trotter after a few moments' reflection. "I think it might be very easily done." "How?" was Mr. Pickwick's inquiry. "Why," replied Mr. Trotter, "my master and I, being in the confidence of the two servants, will be secreted in the kitchen at 10 o'clock. When the family have retired to rest, we shall come out of the kitchen, and the young lady out of her bedroom. A postchaise will be waiting, and away we go." "Well," said Mr. Pickwick. "Well, sir, I have been thinking that if you were in waiting in the garden behind, alone." "Alone," said Mr. Pickwick. "Why alone?" "I thought it very natural," replied Job, "that the old lady wouldn't like such an unpleasant discovery to be made before more persons than can possibly be helped. The young lady, too, sir, consider her feelings." "You are very right," said Mr. Pickwick. "The consideration evinces your delicacy of feeling." "Go on, you are very right." "Well, sir, I have been thinking that if you were waiting in the back garden alone, and I was to let you in, at the door which opens into it, from the end of the passage, at exactly 11:30 o'clock, you would be just in the very moment of time to assist me in frustrating the designs of this bad man, by whom I have been unfortunately ensnared." Here Mr. Trotter sighed deeply. "Don't distress yourself on that account," said Mr. Pickwick. "If he had one grain of the delicacy of feeling which distinguishes you, humble as your station is, I should have some hopes of him." Job Trotter bowed low, and in spite of Mr. Weller's previous remonstrance, the tears again rose to his eyes. "I never see such a feller," said Sam. "Blessed if I don't think he's got a mane in his head as is always turned on." "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick with great severity, "hold your tongue." "Worry well, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "I don't like this plan," said Mr. Pickwick after deep meditation. "Why cannot I communicate with the young lady's friends?" "Because they live 100 miles from here, sir," responded Job Trotter. "That's a clincher," said Mr. Weller aside. "Then this garden," resumed Mr. Pickwick. "How am I to get into it?" "The wall is very low, sir, and your servant will give you a leg up." "My servant will give me a leg up," repeated Mr. Pickwick mechanically. "You will be sure to be near this door that you speak of." "You cannot mistake it, sir. It's the only one that opens into the garden. Tap at it when you hear the clock strike, and I will open it instantly." "I don't like the plan," said Mr. Pickwick, "but as I see no other, and as the happiness of this young lady's whole life is at stake, I adopt it. I shall be sure to be there." Thus, for the second time, did Mr. Pickwick's innate good feeling involve him in an enterprise from which he would most willingly have stood aloof. "What is the name of the house?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "Westgate House, sir." "You turn a little to the right when you get to the end of the town. It stands by itself, some little distance off the high road, with the name on a brass plate on the gate." "I know it," said Mr. Pickwick. "I observed it once before, when I was in this town." "You may depend upon me." Mr. Trotter made another bow, and turned to depart, when Mr. Pickwick thrust a guinea into his hand. "You're a fine fellow," said Mr. Pickwick, "and I admire your goodness of heart." "No thanks." "Remember 11 o'clock." "There is no fear of my forgetting it, sir," replied Job Trotter. With these words he left the room, followed by Sam. "I say," said the latter, "not a bad notion that air crying. I'd cry like a rainwater spout in a shower on such good terms." "How do you do it?" "It comes from the heart, Mr. Walker," replied Job solemnly. "Good morning, sir." "You're a soft customer, you are. We've got it all out o' you anyhow," thought Mr. Weller as Job walked away. We cannot state the precise nature of the thoughts which passed through Mr. Trotter's mind, because we don't know what they were. The day wore on, evening came, and at a little before 10 o'clock, Sam Weller reported that Mr. Jingle and Job had gone out together, that their luggage was packed up, and that they had ordered a chaise. The plot was evidently in execution, as Mr. Trotter had foretold. 10:30 o'clock arrived, and it was time for Mr. Pickwick to issue forth on his delicate errand. Resisting Sam's tender of his greatcoat, in order that he might have no encumbrance in scaling the wall, he set forth, followed by his attendant. There was a bright moon, but it was behind the clouds. It was a fine dry night, but it was most uncommonly dark. Paths, hedges, fields, houses, and trees were enveloped in one deep shade. The atmosphere was hot and sultry. The summer lightning quivered faintly on the verge of the horizon, and was the only sight that varied the dull gloom in which everything was wrapped. Sound there was none, except the distant barking of some restless house-dog. They found the house, read the brass plate, walked round the wall, and stopped at that portion of it which divided them from the bottom of the garden. "You will return to the inn, Sam, when you have assisted me over," said Mr. Pickwick. "Very well, sir." "And you will sit up till I return." "Certainly, sir." "Take hold of my leg, and when I say over, raise me gently." "All right, sir." Having settled these preliminaries, Mr. Pickwick grasped the top of the wall and gave the word over, which was literally obeyed. Whether his body partook in some degree of the elasticity of his mind, or whether Mr. Weller's notions of a gentle push were of a somewhat rougher description than Mr. Pickwick's, the immediate effect of his assistance was to jerk that immortal gentleman completely over the wall on to the bed beneath, where, after crushing 3 gooseberry bushes and a rose tree, he finally alighted at full length. "You han't hurt yourself, I hope, sir," said Sam, in a loud whisper, as soon as he had recovered from the surprise consequent upon the mysterious disappearance of his master. "I have not hurt myself, Sam, certainly," replied Mr. Pickwick from the other side of the wall, "but I rather think that you have hurt me." "I hope not, sir," said Sam. "Never mind," said Mr. Pickwick, rising. "It's nothing but a few scratches. Go away, or we shall be overheard." "Good-bye, sir." "Good-bye." With stealthy steps Sam Weller departed, leaving Mr. Pickwick alone in the garden. Lights occasionally appeared in the different windows of the house, or glanced from the staircases, as if the inmates were retiring to rest. Not caring to go too near the door, until the appointed time, Mr. Pickwick crouched into an angle of the wall and awaited its arrival. It was a situation which might well have depressed the spirits of many a man. Mr. Pickwick, however, felt neither depression nor misgiving. He knew that his purpose was in the main a good one, and he placed implicit reliance on the high-minded Job. It was dull, certainly, not to say dreary, but a contemplative man can always employ himself in meditation. Mr. Pickwick had meditated himself into a doze, when he was roused by the chimes of the neighboring church ringing out the hour 11:30. "That's the time," thought Mr. Pickwick, getting cautiously on his feet. He looked up at the house. The lights had disappeared, and the shutters were closed all in bed, no doubt. He walked on tiptoe to the door and gave a gentle tap. 2 or 3 minutes passing without any reply, he gave another tap rather louder, and then another rather louder than that. At length the sound of feet was audible upon the stairs, and then the light of a candle shone through the keyhole of the door. There was a good deal of unchaining and unbolting, and the door was slowly opened. Now the door opened outwards, and as the door opened wider and wider, Mr. Pickwick receded behind it more and more. What was his astonishment when he just peeped out, by way of caution, to see that the person who had opened it was not Job Trotter, but a servant girl with a candle in her hand. Mr. Pickwick drew in his head again, with the swiftness displayed by that admirable melodramatic performer, Punch, when he lies in wait for the flat-headed comedian with the tin box of music. "It must have been the cat, Sarah," said the girl, addressing herself to someone in the house. "Puss, puss, pussed, tit, tit." But no animal being decoyed by these blandishments, the girl slowly closed the door and refastened it, leaving Mr. Pickwick drawn up straight against the wall. "This is very curious," thought Mr. Pickwick. "They are sitting up beyond their usual hour, I suppose. Extremely unfortunate that they should have chosen this night, of all others, for such a purpose exceedingly." And with these thoughts, Mr. Pickwick cautiously retired to the angle of the wall in which he had been before ensconced, waiting until such time as he might deem it safe to repeat the signal. He had not been here 5 minutes, when a vivid flash of lightning was followed by a loud peal of thunder that crashed and rolled away in the distance. With a terrific noise then came another flash of lightning, brighter than the other, and a second peal of thunder louder than the first. And then down came the rain, with a force and fury that swept everything before it. Mr. Pickwick was perfectly aware that a tree is a very dangerous neighbor in a thunderstorm. He had a tree on his right, a tree on his left, a third before him, and a fourth behind. If he remained where he was, he might fall the victim of an accident. If he showed himself in the center of the garden, he might be consigned to a constable. Once or twice he tried to scale the wall, but having no other legs this time than those with which nature had furnished him, the only effect of his struggles was to inflict a variety of very unpleasant gratings on his knees and shins, and to throw him into a state of the most profuse perspiration. "What a dreadful situation," said Mr. Pickwick, pausing to wipe his brow after this exercise. He looked up at the house. All was dark. They must be gone to bed now. He would try the signal again. He walked on tiptoe across the moist gravel and tapped at the door. He held his breath and listened at the keyhole. No reply, very odd. Another knock. He listened again. There was a low whispering inside, and then a voice cried, "Who's there?" "That's not Job," thought Mr. Pickwick, hastily drawing himself straight up against the wall again. "It's a woman." He had scarcely had time to form this conclusion when a window above stairs was thrown up, and 3 or 4 female voices repeated the query, "Who is there?" Mr. Pickwick dared not move hand or foot. It was clear that the whole establishment was roused. He made up his mind to remain where he was until the alarm had subsided, and then by a supernatural effort to get over the wall or perish in the attempt. Like all Mr. Pickwick's determinations, this was the best that could be made under the circumstances. But unfortunately, it was founded upon the assumption that they would not venture to open the door again. What was his discomfiture when he heard the chain and bolts withdrawn and saw the door slowly opening, wider and wider. He retreated into the corner, step by step, but do what he would, the interposition of his own person prevented its being opened to its utmost width. "Who's there?" screamed a numerous chorus of treble voices from the staircase inside, consisting of the spinster lady of the establishment, 3 teachers, 5 female servants, and 30 boarders, all half-dressed and in a forest of curl papers. Of course Mr. Pickwick didn't say who was there, and then the burden of the chorus changed into lore. "I am so frightened." "Cook," said the lady abbess, who took care to be on the top stair, the very last of the group. "Cook, why don't you go a little way into the garden?" "Please, ma'am, I don't like," responded the cook. "Lor, what a stupid thing that cook is," said the 30 boarders. "Cook," said the lady abbess with great dignity, "don't answer me if you please. I insist upon your looking into the garden immediately." Here the cook began to cry, and the housemaid said it was a shame, for which partisanship she received a month's warning on the spot. "Do you hear, cook?" said the lady abbess, stamping her foot impatiently. "Don't you hear your Mrs. Cook?" said the 3 teachers. "What an impudent thing that cook is," said the 30 boarders. The unfortunate cook, thus strongly urged, advanced a step or 2, and holding her candle just where it prevented her from seeing at all, declared there was nothing there, and it must have been the wind. The door was just going to be closed in consequence, when an inquisitive boarder, who had been peeping between the hinges, set up a fearful screaming, which called back the cook and housemaid, and all the more adventurous in no time. "What is the matter with Miss Smithers?" said the lady abbess, as the aforesaid Miss Smithers proceeded to go into hysterics of 4 young lady power. "Lor, Miss Smithers, dear," said the other 29 boarders. "Oh, the man behind the door," screamed Miss Smithers. The lady abbess no sooner heard this appalling cry than she retreated to her own bedroom, double-locked the door, and fainted away comfortably. The boarders and the teachers and the servants fell back upon the stairs and upon each other, and never was such a screaming and fainting and struggling beheld. In the midst of the tumult, Mr. Pickwick emerged from his concealment and presented himself amongst them. "Ladies, dear ladies," said Mr. Pickwick. "Oh, he says we're dear," cried the oldest and ugliest teacher. "Oh, the wretch." "Ladies," roared Mr. Pickwick, rendered desperate by the danger of his situation, "hear me. I am no robber. I want the lady of the house." "Oh, what a ferocious monster," screamed another teacher. "He wants Miss Tompkins." Here there was a general scream. "Ring the alarm bell, somebody," cried a dozen voices. Don't," shouted Mr. Pickwick. "Look at me. Do I look like a robber? My dear ladies, you may bind me hand and leg, or lock me up in a closet if you like. Only hear what I have got to say, only hear me. How did you come in our garden?" faltered the housemaid. "Call the lady of the house, and I'll tell her everything," said Mr. Pickwick, exerting his lungs to the utmost pitch. "Call her, only be quiet and call her, and you shall hear everything." It might have been Mr. Pickwick's appearance, or it might have been his manner, or it might have been the temptation irresistible to a female mind of hearing something at present enveloped in mystery, that reduced the more reasonable portion of the establishment, some 4 individuals, to a state of comparative quiet. By them it was proposed, as a test of Mr. Pickwick's sincerity, that he should immediately submit to personal restraint, and that gentleman having consented to hold a conference with Miss Tompkins, from the interior of a closet in which the day boarders hung their bonnets and sandwich bags, he at once stepped into it, of his own accord, and was securely locked in. This revived the others, and Miss Tompkins having been brought to and brought down, the conference began. "What did you do in my garden, man?" said Miss Tompkins, in a faint voice. "I came to warn you that one of your young ladies was going to elope tonight," replied Mr. Pickwick, from the interior of the closet. "Elope!" exclaimed Miss Tompkins, the 3 teachers, the 30 boarders, and the 5 servants. "Who with?" "Your friend, Mr. Charles Fitzmarshall." "My friend? I don't know any such person." "Well, Mr. Jingle, then." "I never heard the name in my life." "Then I have been deceived and deluded," said Mr. Pickwick. "I have been the victim of a conspiracy, a foul and base conspiracy. Send to the Angel, my dear ma'am, if you don't believe me. Send to the Angel for Mr. Pickwick's manservant, I implore you, ma'am." "He must be respectable, he keeps a manservant," said Miss Tompkins to the writing and ciphering governess. "It's my opinion, Miss Tompkins," said the writing and ciphering governess, "that his manservant keeps him. I think he's a madman, Miss Tompkins, and the other's his keeper." "I think you are very right, Miss Gwynn," responded Miss Tompkins. "Let 2 of the servants repair to the Angel, and let the others remain here to protect us." So 2 of the servants were dispatched to the Angel in search of Mr. Samuel Weller, and the remaining 3 stopped behind to protect Miss Tompkins and the 3 teachers and the 30 boarders. And Mr. Pickwick sat down in the closet, beneath a grove of sandwich bags, and awaited the return of the messengers, with all the philosophy and fortitude he could summon to his aid. An hour and a half elapsed before they came back, and when they did come, Mr. Pickwick recognized, in addition to the voice of Mr. Samuel Weller, 2 other voices, the tones of which struck familiarly on his ear. But whose they were, he could not for the life of him call to mind. A very brief conversation ensued. The door was unlocked. Mr. Pickwick stepped out of the closet and found himself in the presence of the whole establishment of Westgate House, Mr. Samuel Weller, and old Wardle, and his destined son-in-law, Mr. Trundle. "My dear friend," said Mr. Pickwick, running forward and grasping Wardle's hand, "my dear friend, pray, for heaven's sake, explain to this lady the unfortunate and dreadful situation in which I am placed. You must have heard it from my servant. Say, at all events, my dear fellow, that I am neither a robber nor a madman. I have said so, my dear friend. I have said so already, replied Mr. Wardle, shaking the right hand of his friend, while Mr. Trundle shook the left. And whoever says or has said he is, interposed Mr. Weller, stepping forward, says that which is not the truth, but so far from it, on the contrary, quite the reverse. And if there's any number o men on these here premises as has said so, I shall be worry happy to give all a worry convincing proof o, their being mistaken, in this here worry room. If these worry respectable ladies, have the goodness to retire, and order up, one at a time. Having delivered this defiance with great volubility, Mr. Weller struck his open palm emphatically with his clenched fist, and winked pleasantly on Miss Tomkins, the intensity of whose horror at his supposing it within the bounds of possibility that there could be any men on the premises of Westgate House establishment for young ladies, it is impossible to describe. Mr. Pickwick's explanation, having already been partially made, was soon concluded. But neither in the course of his walk home with his friends, nor afterwards, when seated before a blazing fire at the supper he so much needed, could a single observation be drawn from him. He seemed bewildered and amazed. Once, and only once, he turned round to Mr. Wardle and said, "How did you come here?" "Trundle and I came down here, for some good shooting on the first," replied Wardle. "We arrived tonight, and were astonished to hear from your servant that you were here too." "But I am glad you are," said the old fellow, slapping him on the back. "I am glad you are. We shall have a jovial party on the first, and will give Winkle another chance, old boy?" Mr. Pickwick made no reply. He did not even ask after his friends at Dingley Dell, and shortly afterwards retired for the night, desiring Sam to fetch his candle when he rung. The bell did ring in due course, and Mr. Weller presented himself. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, looking out from under the bedclothes. "Sir," said Mr. Weller. Mr. Pickwick paused, and Mr. Weller snuffed the candle. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick again, as if with a desperate effort. "Sir," said Mr. Weller once more. "Where is that trotter?" "Job, sir." "Yes." "Gone, sir." "With his master, I suppose." "Friend or master, or whatever he is, he's gone with him," replied Mr. Weller. "There's a pair on sir. Jingle suspected my design, and set that fellow on you with this story, I suppose," said Mr. Pickwick, half choking. "Just that, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "It was all false, of course." "All, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "Reglardu, sir, artful dodge." "I don't think he'll escape us quite so easily the next time, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "I don't think he will, sir." "Whenever I meet that Jingle again, wherever it is," said Mr. Pickwick, raising himself in bed and indenting his pillow with a tremendous blow, "I'll inflict personal chastisement on him, in addition to the exposure he so richly merits. I will, or my name is not Pickwick. And whenever I catches hold o' that there melancholy chap with the black hair," said Sam, "if I don't bring some real water into his eyes, for once in a way, my name ain't Weller. Good night, sir."